Hey there guys, Botstowo here. Today what I got for you is a review of the American M45 chemical biological mask. Before I start showing you the individual components, I would first like to talk about some general notes. First of which is that these are no longer being produced. The United States military replaced them with the M53, but you do still see these, in military service every now and again, but it is pretty rare. So what this means is every single example of this mask that you see will be surplus. I know plenty of people have reservations about buying surplus masks, but if you are testing it, if you're doing your preventative maintenance checks and services as you're supposed to be doing even with a brand new mask, a surplus mask will treat you just fine. The second thing I would like to note is that this does implement a second skin just like the M40. So the facepiece itself is made out of silicone, while a second skin that covers the mask is made out of butyl. I quite like that as it keeps the comfort of silicone while also providing you with the chemical defensive capabilities of butyl, but I do recognize that it does insulate heat a lot more, which can be a positive or a negative depending where you are. This second skin is very tight-fitting, so there's no chance of any sort of blister agent getting in between it and the facepiece and causing any sort of degradation of the silicone over long periods of time. Next, I would like to say a word on comfort. In that area, it's about what you would expect from a 1990s designed mask. It's not the most uncomfortable, but that nose cup really isn't great. It weighs down on the bridge of your nose quite a bit. It also has some weight issues, so while it's not as bad as an M40, it's certainly a bit heavier than an M50. Once you add a filter and a voice projection unit, it starts to really compound. And lastly, most of the components on this thing cannot actually be removed and replaced, so repairability is pretty damn low. With all that out of the way, why don't we jump into the mask itself? And since I already talked about the facepiece material, why don't we start with the lenses? As you can see, they have this unique shape that was designed specifically for use with optics or aiming, and it works very well. However, you do get a very poor vertical field of vision, so looking up and down, that's going to be a little harder. But the horizontal field of vision is excellent. It's almost at the level of the M50, but not quite. But yeah, overall vision is quite poor due to the vertical limitations. As you can see, the mask also does support outserts. They come in both clear and tinted, and also just, instead of being like the M40 where you've got the rubber skirt, they just snap onto the lens frames, which is very easy to put on, but Special Forces operators who've used these say that the outserts tend to actually pop off during combat. It's not something I've noticed, but it's still something that happens. Now let's move over to the inlet valve. This thing is threaded in 40mm NATO, so it's compatible with most filters you'll find on the market. The inlet valve itself is pretty high quality, no complaints there, it works fine. And it does actually have two ports, one of which you can plug with a blanking plug that acts as a secondary voice emitter, so using a telephone with this thing is going to be very easy. Moving on to the front of the mask, here is the voice projection unit. Specifically, this is an M7A1 VPU. It's quite similar to the MSA ESP2, but unfortunately it is quite rare. Something I've noticed with them is that they are pretty squeaky, like if you put your hand over it, there's going to be a lot of feedback, but it still works pretty damn well. It turns on with just that little button there. As you can hear, it is on. I hope you can hear that. And it turns off the same way. It's mounted to the mask by these two large clips, one on either side. And then, in case it gets knocked off in combat, it has a retaining cord that loops around the stem of the canister, so it'll be like that. So this thing, even if it falls off, you're not losing it. Taking it off is quite easy. You just lift the levers and it pops off. And there you can see the foam pad and, well, the little button that must be depressed for this thing to turn on. It takes 2 AAA batteries, and the compartment opens up with this little captive screw. Overall, I think this is a great voice projection unit. It's not too heavy, too heavy. It still has a bit of bulk to it, and well, it's very secure for the mask. But when you get to the mounting system on the facepiece itself, that's where we start running into issues. A stock M45 will not actually be able to mount a voice projection unit. You need one of these adapter rings, which are even rarer than the voice projection unit, to actually be able to fit it on there. Luckily, Duke from GasMaskBunker did actually create a 3D printable file for reproduction VPU rings. I will leave a link to that in the description. The voice emitter itself is just a regular voice emitter. It's a little bit quieter than that of the M40, but it's a lot more clear. So when you're talking through this voice projection unit, there's no rattling or any sort of weird buzz. It's very clear. Oh, and I should mention that just like the M40, the M45 does not use an internal microphone for the voice projection unit like the M50 or M53 does. It instead uses a microphone mounted inside of the voice projection unit, visible here, to get the audio. But the M45 does still have an internal microphone, but that's for the comms pass-through. And that is located right on the XL valve cover. As you can see in there, there is this 3-prong connector, but only 2 of those prongs are actually used. The comms lead itself is this 2-prong plug. It's got one of those on both ends. Oops. There we go. And it's just kind of a little cord. I could be wrong, but I believe that this number on the plug itself is the designation for that type of plug, but I could be wrong. So to interface this thing with comms, you first plug this in the pass-through, and then you take the other end and plug it into your push-to-talk or your headset if it supports it. I use these shitty Repro Comtac 3s, and it works. You've got these little, that's the correct port, and this Davies push-to-talk also has the correct port. And here's what it looks like when that's all put together. As you can see, there is the comms pass-through, your cord, and then turning the head, there's the plug. Personally, I quite like the way that the comms integration is designed. It's quite simple to use, and it works great. On top of this, I should note that this is one of the very few masks where you can actually use comms and a voice projection unit at the same time. And that is a huge advantage because, hell, it's really important to talk to people. Because you see, using a voice projection unit, that's for short range communication. So like if you're clearing a building, you talk with your voice projection unit to the people in the room with you. They've got ear pro on, so they probably won't be able to hear you through a primary voice emitter. So it's important to have that. But if you've got somebody in like another room, you use your comms. That's personally the way that I see them being used, and I think that having both the ability to talk through a voice projection unit and through a radio at the same time using a mask, that's a huge advantage that you don't get with almost any other mask. I think it's just the M53 and M54 that can also do this, which is, so you don't have a lot of options. Moving on, we can talk about this whole assembly here. So it's just a normal exhale valve. The valve is located underneath this cover, which does a very good job at protecting it. It is a little bit of a pain to remove, so, that's annoying, but the valve works great. Also, it has a drinking tube, of course. It is a Type M adapter here. So if you've got a Camelback and a Type M adapter for that, it'll work just fine. Also, with, US Army canteens from before the days of the M50, it'll work fine with those too. The fluid transfer rate through this hose is not as good as that on the M50, but it's still, functional. And the stowage port, you can see, is just a rubber socket. That's all it needs to be. Behind the valve, you can see the mask beard, which is there to keep the hood of, like a chemical hood, in place. I wish it were a bit longer, but it does do a pretty good job at, keeping the hood from slipping. I've personally never had that happen while wearing this mask. Now let's talk about this head harness. Normally they are issued with the same head harness as on the M40. I actually got this M40 like 2 days after releasing the M40 review. Probably should have waited, but I didn't know I was getting this. But anyhow, it is a 6-point design that does a very good job at dividing the weight equally across the head, and can be replaced with one of these USGI skull caps that are incredibly comfortable and have a little donning loop, so you can pull the thing over your head very fast. But again, it is a 6-point design, so you can switch it out with almost any head harness that's currently on the market. And now I suppose it's time for me to show off the interior of the mask, starting out with the peripheral seal. And that is just an inverted strip of rubber around the entire interior of the facepiece, and it works well. No comment there, no complaints. Down here you've got your chin cup, which does feature a moisture drain. This chin cup does do a very good job at, cupping your chin. I don't see it slipping at all. And something I forgot to mention when we're taking a look at the exhale valve is it does have passive moisture drainage capabilities due to the bottom mounted exhale valve. While we're here, here's the drinking tube mouthpiece. It's the same as off of an M40, and your internal microphone. There's no way to adjust the position of the internal drinking tube, while wearing the mask, so you just kind of have to push on the exhale valve to move it into your mouth. The oronasal cup here works quite well at preventing fogging, but it isn't the most comfortable. It's, definitely a previous gen nose cup. An interesting feature is that it only has a nose cup valve on one side, and that's to actually create a passive air deflection system. So when you inhale, it'll start on the left side, pass over both lenses, and then enter the chin cup. What that system does is clear fogging that is present on the lenses. However, due to the nose cup being quite good, I've never actually had this thing fog up on me, so it's a little bit redundant, but still nice to have. I've actually never seen an example with the nose cup valve on the left side of the nose cup, so this might not work for left-handed shooters. Here you can see the inside of the lenses. It does actually support glasses inserts, but they are very poorly designed and also incredibly rare. So not only are the chances of you getting them almost nil, they're also just awful. They can fall out. They're not great. They're just tension fit in place. They suck. So I guess the time has come to ask the question of, is this thing actually worth it? The short answer is no, despite it being my personal use mask. To get into the long answer, we of course have to talk about price. I got mine years ago for $90 and have been adding accessories ever since, but now I've been seeing partial kits going for upwards of $400. And for that price, you're getting a mask that's, previous gen, can't really be repaired, has pretty piss poor vision, and is a little bit heavier than most modern masks. It's also a little bulkier. And mind you, while it does have a lot of very great advantages, which is why I use it, specifically because of the fact that you can use both comms and a VPU at the same time, it's not really as good as an M53. And that's really my point, is I personally think this is a really good mask. It's a solid design, but it's just expensive. Every single component is rare as hell, so you're going to have trouble finding it. And it really doesn't do what it does as well as the M53, which, replaced this mask in US Army service for good reason. So, if you're going to be dropping this much money on a mask, you might as well go for an M53. But you see, I personally don't have one yet, so until then, I will, continue using this. And with that, I guess I will end the video. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one, whenever that is.